Well, my name is Toni Netzler. I'm an atheist in Utah. I'm actually a former Catholic. I'm not a former Mormon. I grew up Catholic in Utah, which was, to say the least, very unique experience, I think, because a lot of Mormons don't like to associate with non-Mormons, no matter what they say, especially back when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. It was really hard to find friends who were Mormon and accepting. I think where I grew up, though, was a little bit more open and accepting. I grew up in a more diverse neighborhood, a lot more poor people, a lot more minorities where I grew up on the west side, as opposed, I think, to the east side. It might have been even more contained, more controlled. So that's who I am.
So you said you grew up in a Catholic, more of an upbringing.
Right.
So how was it here for you living in Utah specifically with dealing with Mormon friends, being a Catholic?
It was a very, they try to convert you a lot. They were always trying to take me with them to primary. They were always trying to take me to church, and I did go to the Mormon church a lot with some of them. I went to the Catholic church as well. My house wasn't extremely Catholic. My grandfather was Catholic, and so that's why my mother baptized me Catholic, but my mother wasn't anything. My grandmother was Episcopalian, and so, you know, I kind of had a little more diversity, I think. But yeah, it was hard growing up around the Mormons because a lot of them did shun you. Some would not play with you. My two closest friends were Mormons, though. They were very good Mormons. And like I said, I did go to church with them. I did go to their, I think it was their primary that they used to have. I can't remember what they were called. Got the little CTR ratings. They would try really hard to convert the non-Mormons, as children especially. But I was definitely never going to go down that road. Catholic was hard enough, I think, for me to swallow. Mormon was an even bigger pill to swallow. I mean, I guess I was always kind of a skeptic, but you know, when you're indoctrinated, when you're christened as a baby, and then you go through your communion as a child, and it wasn't until I was going to go through my confirmation late that I converted. Well, not converted, that I left. But yeah, it was quite a unique experience. There was a lot of kids who wouldn't talk to me because I wasn't Mormon. But like I said, my two very best friends growing up were Mormons.
What did your parents, they ever tell you stuff about Mormons when you were growing up at all, as far as?
Only what they knew. My family was from New York.
Okay.
They came out here when my mom was like 17 years old. She moved out here with her parents and her sisters. And so, and my mom was a single mom until I was like 10, and then she met my stepdad, who was a Jack Mormon. So they didn't really know a lot about Mormons. They thought the Mormons were a lot like Puritans. They thought they were like, or the Amish, they wore the funny clothes and the hats. So when they got out here and they saw that the Mormons dressed like normal people, except maybe the polygamists, but they were just kind of normal people, then they were like, oh yeah, I guess they don't dress weird. I mean, sure, they go to church an awful lot, and they have a lot of babies, but of course they grew up in New York where the Catholics have a lot of babies too, so, you know, I guess that wasn't that big of a shock for them.
So around what age do you think it was for you when you started to doubt Christianity?
Like I said, I was always a bit of a skeptic of the religion, but when in the Catholic Church, they have you only read the good things. They give you the little missals to read, and then they have the little books in church. And so what you study and what you study in catechism isn't really the Bible. It's the good parts of Christianity. It's the pretty parts of Jesus. But they still have the Eucharist, which is creepy. But the whole body and blood of Christ, transubstantiation, which I never quite got that. But they don't really teach that to you as a child. It's not till you get older, till they try to explain to you exactly what they mean by that. So when I was going to get confirmed in the Catholic Church, I decided it was just around the time I started high school. I had a friend who was interested in becoming Catholic, and he asked me if I would help him, and I thought, well, I can't help somebody unless I'm actually confirmed, unless I'm a better Catholic. By then, I'd kind of stopped going to church. I was a teenager, you know, preteen. Church is the last thing you want to do, and they don't force it on you as much in the Catholic Church as the Mormon Church. So I started going back to church a little bit, and I started to finally actually read the Bible and read up on Catholicism, and that's when I started to realize that that was all crap. It was all bullshit. Just as much as I thought Mormonism was bullshit, I thought Pentecostals, the Catholics, their stuff just as crazy. It's just a different kind of crazy. So it was a kind of on my own, and it was before the internet. So to lose your religion back then required a library like I'm in right now. It required reading books, hunting on your own, talking to other people. And I didn't really know a lot of non-religious people. I mean, they were either Mormon or Catholic or something else. But I knew a lot of like Jack Mormons at that point. I started to get to know a lot of my more friends were leaving the Mormon church, stopping going to church because they were teenagers. And they didn't want to go, the thing they wanted to do was go to church. So, yeah, it was a drawn-out process for me, probably longer than it would have been if we'd had the internet.
So did you ever, like, when you had questions about it, when you doubted stuff, or when you were very skeptical of the religion, did you ever talk to your parents or anybody actually in the church and have them try to
I didn't because my parents, like I said, my mom wasn't anything. She wasn't religious at all. It was my grandfather who was Catholic, and he was very Catholic. He went to church every Sunday. He was very active in the Catholic Church. And so I didn't talk to him. I did it all on my own. And I never talked to the priest or anything because I just didn't feel that comfortable or that close. And I didn't want to be pulled back into it. Once I started to let go, I wanted to let go. And I didn't want anybody to try and pull me back.
Did you talk to any of your friends about it when you were that age about?
Yeah, I did. I had some other Catholic friends at the time. I'd met some Catholic friends, and they stayed pretty Catholic, at least until they got older. Even then, I think they stayed Catholic, but they didn't really participate in the church much anymore. But no, I had a few other doubting friends at that age, but none of us were really openly atheist. It was a hard word back then. I mean, it wasn't something you really announced, but by the time I got to college, I was comfortable with it, and that's when I kind of experimented a little bit at the late end of high school, beginning of college, try Wiccan, try going to other churches, Baptist, Protestant, whatever, but none of them stuck. None of it stuck, so. And that's where I met more atheists, was definitely in college.
Yeah.
That's where you find them.
So, being that you kind of were an atheist before people could actually research it, when I was younger, I was always told an atheist was a person who believes in absolutely nothing, and I believed that for most of my young adult life. So, for you to tell people you were an atheist at that time in college, how did they react to you? Or did they not understand it?
Some understood it, some just didn't care, some didn't. Okay. It was a lot of. I guess I didn't hang out with the crowds that were very religious either. Most of my friends were either Wiccan at that point, or atheists, or non-practicing Mormons. So I think to announce it like at work was harder than in my private life. It wasn't something I advertised. It wasn't something. Atheist activism. I mean, there was Madalyn Murray O'Hair back then.
Yeah.
And probably some locals, but I wasn't really that active. That's what I was. I'd lost my religion, and it was no big deal.
Yeah.
It wasn't a huge part of who I was. I think I've become more active in recent years than I was back then, but back then people tend to keep their religion more to themselves too anyway. The push with the religious right wasn't so big. The push to have your religious beliefs be politicized and legislated really wasn't as strong back then as it is now. And so I think I became a harder atheist to push back.
Yeah. I think I fall in the same boat.
Right?
So, if you had to tell someone, or if you had to give some advice on how, if they're questioning religion, or if they're looking for more answers, and you had to give them advice, what kind of advice would you give them?
I would give them the hard advice. I would say you have to study everything. Don't just read. A lot of people say, read this atheist book, read that atheist book. You can get a lot from that. But read the religious books too, because you can get a lot from them. And I think you get a lot more from them. I think the saying that, to get an atheist you need to have someone read the Bible, I think that's very true. I think you have to study religions, and you have to study why they're alike and why they're different. And I think that will help you understand where they came from and study, not just Christianity to now, but before Christianity, because that will, once you see where they come from, it's easy to realize, oh, they kind of stole from this and they kind of stole from that. And so it can't possibly be from God because they stole it from somebody else. So, yeah, I think the hard road's a better, I think it sticks more. Not that somebody who just says, I just don't believe, whether they've studied or not, okay. But if you're questioning, I think you need to go back to your own religion, and you need to study that, and not just the good stuff that they want you to in church. You really need to get into the dirty of it, especially Mormonism and Scientology stuff. Get into the dirty, because that's where you'll find more truth.
So where do you see the state of, I guess, the Mormon movement, or not Mormon, the atheist movement in the state, with all the Mormons, with all the other religions? I think I've noticed in the past few years it growing quite a bit and becoming more mainstream. Where do you see it in the future?
I think it's going to continue to grow, at least I hope. I think it's a huge counterculture. I think it's a push. I think a lot of the Proposition 8 stuff, and I think a lot of the attitudes towards homosexuals in that community has pushed a lot of atheists to say, hey, no, this isn't right. We're not going to let you continue to legislate what you believe when it's wrong and when it's against the Constitution. And I think the Bush years helped bring a lot of atheists out, just as much as the internet has. And I think as long as the internet's around and as long as the internet continues to grow and is a source of knowledge for young kids, I think the religions are more doomed. I think they'll always be around in some incarnation, but I think unless they admit their histories a lot of times and say, okay, this was wrong and this might not be true, but we like it, then I think they're going to have a hard time keeping the young kids as a part of it. Because I think the more that they see other cultures and other diversity, which is something the internet has done immensely, I think they're in trouble.
So any final words, anything you want to say on any subject you want to talk about?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question.
It's very open-ended.
Yeah, it is. I don't know, I think the question of if I think it would continue to grow, I think that's an important thing to look at. I think it's important to get our message out there, and I think it's important to be open. I think it's hard to not be afraid, especially, jobs, families. Like if my husband's family sees this video, they might freak out a little bit, because his family's very Catholic. I was an atheist married in a Catholic church. I totally got married in the Catholic church, and I was an out atheist at the time, pretty out. I mean, his family, at least his parents didn't know. His siblings might have had an idea, but his family. Yeah, because my husband was Catholic. He's not anymore, really. But I think it's important to admit who you are, and it's the same thing that the homosexuals did before us. The more people know a homosexual in their life that's close to them, the more comfortable they become with it, and the more they realize they're no different than anybody else, and they should be entitled to the same rights as everybody else. Granted, we probably have a harder job to do because Christianity is so ingrained in our society, and people are so comfortable with it, and they're so okay letting it do what it wants to do, that for people to finally push back and say, we're not going to let you legislate this anymore, we're not going to let you control this anymore, is a hard thing for people to let go of that privilege they've had for so long.